Hey, everybody.
Hey, Bob, I'm going to drop off and try to start again, get my camera working.
Okay.
Hi, Bob.
How's everybody?
Doing well. How about you?
Good, thank you.
Good.
Hey, Bob.
Hey, everybody. Hi, Shrivers. Who is that?
I think it said George Hughes.
George Hughes.
That was a
There
funny
he
noise.
is.
All right. Going to open up with prayer. Dear Lord, it's so good to be with everyone tonight and with you. We invite you into our homes and hearts and minds, and we pray for your wisdom and guidance and the Holy Spirit to each of our homes where we are. Bring us together in the Spirit and open up the Word to us that we might learn and grow. And as always, come to know you and love you and serve you. And we thank you for all your blessings in our life, and pray for a blessing on our time tonight. And we ask and pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, well, we're going to just started Matthew 24 last time. And so we're going to pick it up there. I don't think we'll get through it tonight, but if we do, I have another short section on modern Israel in the end times. We did talk about the prophets, I want to talk a little bit about the creation of the state of Israel and how that fits into the end times. And then after these two sections, we'll go to the book of Revelation. So I did change the presentation a little bit. So if you have your presentation, it won't be exactly the way it looks to the one I sent you a while ago. I can, if you ever want an updated one, just let me know after tonight, and I'll be happy to send you a new one. So in Matthew 24, in the first two verses, that starts out at the temple, says that as Jesus came out of the temple and was going away, his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. And then he asked them, do you see all these? Do you not? Truly, I tell you, not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down. So we did talk last week about the significance of the temple and the Temple Mount. So tonight, we'll start in verse 3, and it has to do with the Mount of Olives, because the place that Jesus is teaching changes. And as always, if anybody has any questions or comments or anything, just speak up, just unmute. You don't have to wait for me to recognize you, or, just stop and ask your questions or your comments, and we'll go down a rabbit trail once in a while if we have to. So that's all right. We're not in a hurry. So oftentimes in the Gospels, Jesus teaches certain things at certain backdrops that have biblical significance. He taught often. He was not in Jerusalem a lot during his ministry, probably only 20% of his time. But whenever he was there for the festivals. and he often taught things about himself in relation to the festivals going on. So we see that in Matthew 24, where he is on the Mount of Olives in verse 3. When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately and saying, "Tell us when this will be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age." So what's the significance of the Mount of Olives? Well, the Mount of Olives is where Jesus wept over Jerusalem. Jesus entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday from the Mount of Olives, and that was a prophetic fulfillment of his kingship. Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, which is on the Mount of Olives, before his crucifixion, Jesus being the Lamb of God, and who would go to the cross, ultimate sacrifice for our sins. And then when Jesus said, "Meet me," he told his disciples to meet him in a certain place after his resurrection. That place was the Mount of Olives. And so he ascended into heaven from there after his resurrection, which speaks to his lordship, and where he's now reigning on high in glory in heaven till he returns. So the Mount of Olives has great significance. This is a view of Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. So the Mount of Olives, the area between this view, the Mount of Olives, and that city wall there of Jerusalem is the Kidron Valley. And then beyond the wall is the old city of Jerusalem. Of course, you see the Dome of the Rock. The old city of Jerusalem is about a mile square, and it has 4 quarters, and Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and Armenian. And then you can see beyond the old city is a modern city. So that's the view of the Mount of Olives today. To the left of the Dome of the Rock, if you're looking at it to the left, you see that kind of a big building there. That area to the left there is in the direction of Mount Zion. And it's believed that Jesus and the disciples had the Last Supper up on the Mount Zion. So they walked their way back to where we're looking from, walked through the Kidron Valley, and then up to the Mount of Olives, where Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. So that gives you an aerial view from the Mount of Olives and how close it is to the city of Jerusalem. These are steps leading down from the Mount of Olives to the Kidron Valley and eventually to the city. And those were uncovered by archaeologists. Those are the actual steps, stones from, most likely from Jesus's day when he walked from the Mount of Olives down to Jerusalem. So that's one of my favorite sites. It's just amazing to see where he walked just like that. So here's why did Jesus teach? What did he teach in Matthew 24, verse 3? Why did he sit on the Mount of Olives while he taught? Well, it wasn't a coincidence. This is 24, verse 3. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. "Tell us," they said, "when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming in the end of the age?" So it's not a coincidence that the disciples asked Jesus about the end of the age on the Mount of Olives, because they would have been familiar with Zechariah's prophecy about the Messiah standing on the Mount of Olives. And this is Zechariah's prophecy from Zechariah chapter 14. So I'm going to go ahead and read that. It says, "I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. The city will be captured, the houses ransacked, and the women raped. Half of the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be taken from the city. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as he fights on a day of battle. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. Remember we talked about that day, or the day of the Lord, when we looked at the prophets? So that's an example of on that day, meaning the day of judgment, the end times, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is east of Jerusalem. And the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley with half of the mountain moving north and half moving south. You will flee by my mountain valley, for it will extend to Azel. You will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. So you get the sense here that this is an end time prophecy. The idea that the Lord and his righteous ones will come with him almost has an Armageddon sound, like a final battle. But is this figurative? I mean, if the Mount of Olives splits in two, how could he have 1 foot on each side? So it kind of speaks to end times, and yet it's also is sort of like a vision in a sense too. So it's kind of hard to pin this down exactly as something that's literal, but at the same time, it does have really solid end time terminology in it. And the Mount of Olives, it's referred to here as a place that the Lord will appear when he returns, just as he did when he left this world on his way to the cross and where he prayed before that. So that's a passage from Zechariah that no doubt Jesus and the disciples knew about. And Jesus is speaking end time language in Matthew 24. So Jesus began his entrance into Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, and then he entered the city through the Eastern Gate, or also called the Golden Gate, on Palm Sunday. And I wanted to give you a picture. This is Israel today. This is the Eastern Gate, or the Golden Gate, that is one of the gates to get into the Old City. There are gates all around the Old City today. This one is walled up, and the others are not, or some of the others are not, and that's how you enter into the Old City. So this is how it would look from the Mount of Olives, and you can see today that it's walled up. The Turkish Empire controlled Palestine for 400 years, from 1517 to 1917, to the end of World War I. So during that time, they walled up this city gate, perhaps to make a statement to the Jewish people that, don't get any ideas. This gate is closed. Don't get any expectations up about any Messiah coming. Maybe a show of power or derision to the Jews. Who knows? But they walled it up. And Ezekiel has a prophecy about that Eastern Gate and the coming of the Messiah. And would someone be willing to read that? What's up on the on this slide here? Ezekiel 44, 1 through 3.
Then the man brought me back to the outer gate of the sanctuary, the one facing east, and it was shut. The Lord said to me, "This gate is to remain shut. It must not be opened. No one may enter through it. It is to remain shut because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered through it. The prince himself is the only one who may sit inside the gateway to eat in the presence of the Lord. He is to enter by way of the portico of the gateway and go out the same way."
Yeah, so this Ezekiel prophecy, it's one of those prophecies that it could refer to, well, it definitely refers to this Eastern Gate, the Golden Gate, facing the Mount of Olives. The Lord said to me, the gate is to remain shut. I don't believe it was shut until after Jesus came. And then it says it is to remain shut because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered through it. Could be interpreted as Jesus on Palm Sunday, that the Lord, the God of Israel, Jesus, has entered through it. And the Prince of Peace, is the only one who may sit inside the gateway to eat in the presence of the Lord. And he is to enter by way of the portico of the gateway and go out the same way. Is that a reference to his second coming? Being that it's shut and the only one who can go through it will be the Prince. So,
Bob, I don't think a brick wall is going to stop Jesus.
of course not. But if you're if you don't believe that Jesus was truly the Son of God, if you don't believe he rose from the dead, which Muslims don't believe, then what they're saying is, anybody who claims to be the Messiah, who will be a man, thinks he's going to walk through that gate, he's not. So yeah, the irony is that he's not. It will not stop him. But if you don't believe that he truly was raised, and you don't believe he's the Son of God, then you might think that would do something to stop him.
But if they were afraid, if they were not afraid, there wouldn't have been any reason to block the entrance.
Well, it's a sign of it could be a sign of domination, just to say, look, you see that gate, the one you thought was your hope lied in? Well, you have no hope because we're blocking it out. And so it's a way to demoralize a defeated people, and it's a way to show them that we're in control. And so I think that probably wasn't unusual when the army was victorious. Usually what they would do is they would tear down your city walls, tear down your sacred sites to just tell you that you are totally defeated. So it could have a symbolic message too, and not just one to prevent the Messiah from coming, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So having read that, do you think the Prince of Peace, do you think Jesus will literally enter through that gate? Do you believe he will return as a person, or do you believe this is a symbolic vision of the second coming that's using biblical imagery, but really isn't going to happen? Anybody have any thoughts about that?
Could you go back to the prophecy on from Ezekiel,
Yeah.
where actually, yes, that one. So the one facing east, where was the reference? Was it 2 slides back of north and south, east and west about the mountain?
Yeah, the Mount of Olives would be split in two when
Right.
the Lord
So-
returns on that day.
But doesn't that align with Jesus? He covers us all, no matter where we are, to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west.
Oh yeah, you could read it that way. Sure.
Yeah, that he will reign.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
sure.
And I think he'll come back the way he left.
Through those gates.
Well, coming down like he ascended into heaven, I believe he'll come back down that same way. And I believe that no matter where we are, we will see it, we will know it.
Yes, I agree. Okay, so we're going to go through Matthew 24 verse by verse, because you can see in every verse or two, there's just really a lot to talk about. And we really do have to kind of parse it and see just what is Jesus talking about. So here's a couple of verses from Matthew 24, and I put them together because they're similar. And this is what Jesus says at one point in this chapter. He says, "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and he will deceive many. And then if anyone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and produce great signs and omens to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Take note, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. So Jesus is clearly telling his disciples, I am the Messiah. And if anyone tells you otherwise, don't believe them. So what Jesus, in Jesus' teaching, there's an echo in Deuteronomy that I'll read to you. So you can see once again how these echoes that Jesus is teaching are all, they're new teachings because he's teaching them, but they're also a culmination of everything that God has been saying for a long time. So this is from Deuteronomy 13, verses 1 through 8. If prophets or those who divine by dreams, we read this last time, appear among you and promise you omens or portents, and the omens or the portents declared by them take place. In other words, if they're prophesying and their dreams are true, and they say, let us follow other gods, if that leads you to, not only does it, if that leads you astray to follow someone else who's claiming to be the Messiah, don't follow, you must not heed the words of those prophets or those who divine by dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you indeed love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. So this is all about being drawn away to worship other gods by being impressed with what someone is doing in the name of God. And that's why in John's gospel, Jesus does many signs and wonders, but the signs and wonders are what the people want him to continue doing. But what Jesus is after is for those signs and wonders to lead people to believe in him as the Son of God. That's what he's after in John's gospel. And so some of the Jewish people understood that and followed him, and some said, well, Moses did this in the wilderness, and Moses did that. And at one point, Jesus says, you keep looking for signs, but that's not why I came. The signs are being done because I am who I am, but they're all meant to bring you to faith in me. That's what the Gospel of John is after. And that's why it culminates with, at the end, where Thomas says, my Lord and my God, after he doubted. That's what Jesus is after. He wants people to say, my Lord and my God. So there were, in fact, other Jewish men who claimed to be the Messiah. For example, there was a man named Simon Bar Kokhba, which translated means son of a star. He led a revolt against Rome in 132 AD, and he claimed to be the Messiah. And he was crucified, and the rebellion was put down. And Josephus, the historian from that time period, writes, there were crosses as far as the eye could see, that the Romans put the rebellion down in a very harsh way. So other people had come and said, I'm the Messiah. And is this referring to, could this be referring to the Antichrist? Going back here, some people who believe Jesus will come, and well, the false Messiah or the Antichrist will come before Jesus returns. They would interpret this to mean the Antichrist will come. And that's who Jesus is talking to, somebody who's going to appear to be the savior for the Jewish people, and will be involved in the rebuilding of the temple, but then will want to be worshipped as a god, and then the Jewish people will come to their senses. But you could interpret this, if that's the way you interpret it, to say that's the Antichrist coming. Okay, then we get into Matthew a little bit further down, 6 through 12, and I put these together because they kind of fit together. in Matthew 24:6, I'm going to read from the Bible. It says, "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All this is but the beginning of birth pangs. Then they will hand you over to be tortured, and you will be put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. Then many will fall away, and they will betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because of the increase of lawlessness, the love of many will grow cold." So wars, famines, earthquakes, hearts growing cold. Is this normal time? Is Jesus saying, I'm coming into the world again as the world is today? There'll be famines, there'll be earthquakes, there'll be wars, hearts will grow cold, people will hate each other, nations will rise against nations. Is that really changed? Is that not the normal state of the world? Or the pre-tribulation rapture people teach that this is a prophecy of an escalation of tribulation right before the end comes. And that's why they say Revelation is so graphic in its description of the end times. What they're saying is, no, it's going to get to a level it's never seen before. Sometimes I don't know how much worse it can get if you think about human history, and that's all that's been done to people. So again, we talked about the pre-trib rapture first because I wanted you to see that you can interpret this two ways. Either the world being the world, or a particularly horrible time in the world that's even worse than ever before, right before the end comes. Everybody's pretty quiet tonight. So I'll keep going until you stop me.
I just wanted to make comment. I guess I'm hoping that it's just it's like the world is today. But when it goes on into verse 14, it mentions, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." Does that mean that there's still people in the world that have not heard about Jesus? So the gospel's got to be shared everywhere before the end will come.
Yeah, let's keep going. We're almost there. I think it's coming right up, actually.
Okay.
We've got 13, and then we'll go to 14.
Okay, sorry. I jumped ahead.
No, that's okay. Yeah, like I said, we're going to go verse by verse, and it's kind of a lead into that next section.
Okay.
So, excuse me, but we the scribers, we were talking about this, and we were thinking that they're saying that there will be wars will come, but then in the end times it will be nation against nation. And I was taking that to believe, there's always been some type of war, and like there's always been earthquakes in certain parts of the world, and there's always been famine in some parts. But he's kind of saying that when it gets to the end times, it's going to be way worse. It's going to be like consuming the whole world, not just parts of it. And I think that in order for it to get that bad, is saying like you will be persecuted and so on. It won't just be a war like country against country. It will be a war of Christians versus non-Christians. And we're nowhere near that right now, but it's not hard to get that close to it.
No, you can really see, to me, one of the main threads of the Bible that starts in Genesis and goes all the way through Revelation is the escalation of good versus evil. It starts right out in Genesis. After Adam and Eve rebel, well, what happens next? We have the first murder, Cain and Abel. then there's somebody that comes along, I think his name is Lamech, and he says, oh, you think Cain was bad? I killed 70 people. So escalation. Then you have all sorts of things in the Bible that show the fallen nature of the world and how far people have gone from their relationship with God and the way things are intended. Then we get to the New Testament, and now evil ratchets itself up as the Son of God comes in the world, and Satan exposes himself to who he really is in the wilderness. Satan goes full force at Jesus and his people. Jesus, with his power and his people, returns and is victorious over Satan in the battle, in the war, but there are battles still to be fought. And then in Revelation, it's almost like the ultimate good and evil exposed. So, yeah, I mean, we seem to be progressing towards that end. So for us, we just continue to live a kingdom life, knowing that the war has already been won. There's just battles that have to be fought in our lives, which is different than a normal war where you don't know who's going to win in the end until all the battles are resolved. We know the result of the war between good and evil, but Satan is going to do what he's going to do until the very end. So yeah, it could very well be what you said. So after saying all that, in verse 13, Jesus says, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. So verse 13 to me implies that believers are not going to be taken out of whatever times are experienced on earth and exempt from tribulation, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. The one who endures, the one who is faithful, the one who lives his life for the Lord while he has a life or she has a life, you will be saved. So the rapture to me, like I said in the beginning, like I said in the beginning, it shouldn't separate us. I could be wrong, and the pre-tribulation rapture believers might be right. I don't have an answer, but the rapture just seems contrary to the rest of Scripture of the faithful suffering in the world when suffering is upon them, and God not removing them from tribulation, but being there with them, and they coming out on the other side to receive their reward. I mean, that seems to be to me the story of the Bible, and I'm a little hesitant when there's one teaching at the end that's contrary to the rest of it. But like I said, I'm not an authority on it. I just have my own view on it, and so
Bob?
yeah.
I have a question that goes back to verse 24 in there about when Jesus says that he's going to deceive even the elect. What do you think Jesus meant that by elect?
Trying to find. Oh, okay, yeah, that was the. Yeah, that kind of jumped out at me too.
Yeah.
Okay, so according to the Reformed Church, the elect are those who are preordained and predestined before they're born to be saved. So that whole predestination theology was very central to John Calvin's teaching. Excuse me, I have to let my cat out of the room.
I have a cat in my room too.
Like Bernie Sanders, and he just shows up everywhere, and you never know where he's going to be.
I have a cat right here on my desk, as a matter of fact.
So John Calvin, very influential teaching, said that we're born as elected people, we're predestined to be God's people, and then God also predestines others to be condemned. So Paul writes that before he was born, God had a plan for him to be a preacher to the Gentiles and to be saved by Jesus. So that's election is a thorny theology, especially today, where it's not very popular since the pendulum has swung the other way with God's love for all people. That's kind of preached a lot. Not that God doesn't love all people, but it doesn't matter what you believe, that in the end, God is going to love everybody so much that they'll all be saved. So the elect, to me, that's what election is. It's a preordained life that God has set for you, that you will be part of his elect. So that's, I don't know what else to say about that. It's
We on verse 11? Is that the?
well, a couple of panels ago, I combined 4 and 5 and 23 to 26 because they all talk about the Messiah coming, and don't be misled.
Right.
So we didn't get to 24 yet, but we did cover it because it all has to do with the same teaching. So
Okay.
we're actually on verse 13, but
Oh, that's, yeah. I'm sorry.
I mentioned it in the other panel because I combined these two passages.
Okay, because mine finishes, it says, well, even at the beginning in verse 11, it says many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. But then in 24, it says miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that could be one of those passages that you could spend a lot of time reading different commentaries. I think it's one of the hard sayings of Jesus. I'm not an expert in election. I actually did read John Calvin, his work, The Institutes in Seminary. I did a paper on that, and I think there's a lot more to him than election, but that's the theology of election. Is there are those who are saved beforehand, and that God. One of the passages that he alludes to is, for example, Pharaoh. God says that he hardened Pharaoh's heart not to let the Jewish people go from slavery. And then Paul writes in one of his books, in one of his letters, he goes, well, you might say it's not fair. How could God harden someone's heart and then condemn them for not believing? And then Paul says, who are you to question God? Not everything in the Bible is neat and tidy. And I believe, so I always go back to, I believe there are people who are preordained to have a certain mission in life. I do also believe that we have free will. And I don't try and reconcile that, I just accept both. And that's kind of a Jewish way of thinking, a Hebrew or a Semitic way of thinking. The Western way of thinking is try to resolve every loose end and try and make it reasonable. But to me, you're always going to make it at the expense of another teaching in the Bible. So I just, I leave it to God to know the difference. I do believe I've had a call in my life to do what I'm doing right now, but I do believe I had to make choices. I do know that ultimately God's going to have his way in the world, but yet I believe there's human freedom. And I just kind of leave it at that. And that's how I handle it. Whereas other Christians will have a more definitive answer.
Yeah.
Like Calvin, and they'll say, well, those who are elected and those who are predestined and those who aren't. And that's the end of it.
I have a oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Susan. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a footnote in the on the side of the verses I'm looking at that we're reading. It says, talking about 24:21, does this describe the Great Tribulation? And the author says maybe.
Yeah.
Some think this describes a future time of unprecedented disaster, judgment to come upon the world at the end of the age, and it gives references in Revelation. Others believe this refers to the terrible suffering that occurred when Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. It goes on, it says, people died at the hands of Roman troops or by starvation, fire, and disease. And to a certain extent, God's people can expect to face tribulation in every age.
Yeah, I actually have a few slides on that.
Okay.
Well, you're just kind of like my plant in the audience tonight. You're just bringing up all the slides we're coming up to, because I have a couple on that.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm really comfortable in saying I know what I know, and I know who Jesus is. I know what he calls me to do and how to live. And then there are certain things where I can't quite understand how both things are in the Bible, election and free will. And I don't spend a lot of time on that, although scholars like to write whole books on it, because to me, I'll never know the answer. So I'm happy to leave that one up to the Lord as far as election goes. So in verse 14, it says, now, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached, Jesus says, in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So traditional Christianity, Methodism, Anglicanism, Lutheran, Presbyterian, they all teach that traditional Christianity interprets this to mean the gospel will go forth to all nations until the time Jesus returns and the end times begin. Just like Jesus sent out the apostles and said, go to the four ends of the earth and baptize in my name. And now the pre-trib rapture people will take this verse and they have a unique spin on it. So what they're saying is this time of testimony to all nations will happen during the tribulation period. So just to kind of review a little bit, we talked about Daniel's prophecy of 70 weeks. The 7-year period is the last week, and it's divided into 2 3.5-year periods and hasn't been fulfilled. That's what the pre-trib rapture teaches. During the first half, the Antichrist will appear. He'll appear to be a champion of the Jewish people. He'll make a pact with them, and the temple will be rebuilt. He's going to break the pact with Israel, and he was going to reveal himself for who he is, and he's going to demand to be worshipped. Then they say the eyes of the Jewish people will be opened. Then they will come to accept Jesus, and they will preach the gospel to the people who are not raptured. So this is going to last for the second half of the 7-year period, 3.5 years, and then the end will come. So that's why so many evangelicals are supporters of Israel and the Jewish people. So how they interpret this, the kingdom will be preached in the whole world, and then the end will come. They're saying it's going to come before the end times during the tribulation period. And that's when the Jewish people will preach to the rest of the world that the Messiah has come. And they will bring many more to know the Lord and be saved. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so in verse 15, Jesus says, now my Bible says, when you see the desolating sacrilege in the holy place, as spoken by the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Some say desolating sacrilege, some say abomination that causes desolation. That comes directly from Daniel, those words. Daniel talks about the holy place and the desolating sacrilege. So what is he talking about? Well, in the 2nd century BC, 200 years before Jesus came, first of all, you can say, I'm going to talk about that. what that means, the 2nd century BC? Is he talking about the Antichrist? Is Jesus talking about the Antichrist? So when you see standing in the holy place, the abomination that causes desolation, is Jesus referring to another temple in a future period that will be desecrated in the way that Daniel is talking about? Or is he talking about the destruction of the temple that he's looking at from the Mount of Olives, that the Romans are going to destroy? Or is this a reference to the 2nd century BC when this happened? In 175 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes gained control of Palestine. He wanted to impose Hellenization or Greek culture on all the people. So he began to remodel Jerusalem into a Greek city. He outlawed Judaism, he outlawed circumcision, and he outlawed the study of the Torah. He put a statue of Zeus in the temple. He sacrificed a pig on the altar. He looted the sacred vessels from the temple and the treasury. The book of Maccabees, which is in the Apocrypha, chronicles the Jewish rebellion against Antiochus. And they were successful and rededicated the temple. And that's when the menorah burned, the candelabra burned for 8 days, even though there was enough oil for only 1 day. So it was a miracle. And that's how Hanukkah got its start. That's how Hanukkah celebrates that. That's why you have 8 lights on the menorah that you light up one every night in the holiday of Hanukkah. So this is the way that Josephus described Antiochus. He was a historian in this 1st and 2nd century. Now, Antiochus was not satisfied either with his unexpected taking the city or with its pillage or with the great slaughter he had made there, but being overcome with his violent passions and remembering what he had suffered during the siege, he compelled the Jews to dissolve the laws of their country, keep their infants uncircumcised, to sacrifice pigs or swine's flesh upon the altar, against which they all opposed themselves, and the most approved among them were put to death. So Antiochus desecrated the temple with pig slaughters. So he can be seen as a fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy, and he can also be seen by some as a precursor of the Antichrist, who will appear in the last days and do the same thing. Because he also put up a statue of Zeus to be worshipped in the temple, and the Antichrist is going to want to be worshipped, according to those who believe in one ultimate Antichrist who's going to come. Is everybody clear about that? Any questions at all? Okay, just keep making our way through 25, 24.
I had a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
So is the idea then that this could have just been an example of what's going to happen again?
Antiochus came way after Daniel's prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
So was it a fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy since it came after? And it was what Antiochus did was very similar to what you might say a desolating sacrilege would be.
Mm-hmm.
Or was it more than one? Did it refer to more than one event? That plus the Romans destroying it after Jesus was raised? Or is it the Antichrist? And that's one of the things about prophecies, that their time, they often speak in time that goes back and forth from the present to the future without specific dates. So you kind of have to interpret biblical history and try and figure out what were they referring to. And that's why end times theology can go in different directions. because you could interpret a prophecy in a couple of different ways.
Well, it
On-
also
on
it
a
also
couple
gives
different events.
Revelation 13, 5 through 7 says, it's referring to that it says an Antichrist will commit a similar sacrilege just
Right.
before Christ returns. Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
so it could be both. Could be,
Mhm,
like we said in the beginning, are there many antichrists in every age?
mhm.
Is there an antichrist in every age who is despicable, and the one at the end will happen to be the last one, or is there one ultimate antichrist? And we don't know. Well, I don't know. Some people are more certain.
The idea is just to be ready.
Yeah, to follow. Okay, so we know Jesus's teaching tells us to be alert, to be faithful, to live the way he told us to live. And so when it does happen, number one, we won't be surprised. And number two, we'll be waiting for him, and we'll have nothing to fear because there'll be great chaos and suffering around, but we won't have to worry because, as he said, we've been faithful to the end. So the destruction in the 2nd century BC could be one interpretation of Jesus' teaching. Here's another one. The destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and then the Romans leveled the entire city in 132 AD. So, and they were times of great suffering. Again, this is Josephus and his account of what the inhabitants of Jerusalem went through in those days. But when they went in numbers into the lanes of the city with their swords drawn, they slew those whom they overtook without mercy and set fire to their houses wherever the Jews fled, and burnt every one of them, every soul in them, and laid waste a great many of the rest. And when they were come into the houses to plunder them, they found in them entire families of dead men, and the upper rooms full of dead corpses, that is of such as died by the famine, because the city was under siege, so no food could get in by the Romans. The whole city ran down with blood. And now, since his soldiers were already quite tired with killing men, and yet there appeared to be a vast multitude still remaining alive, Caesar gave orders to slay the aged and the infirm. The tallest and the most beautiful he reserved them for the triumph. That would be the triumphal procession of victory by the Romans. And Titus also sent a great number into the provinces as a present to them, that they might be destroyed upon their theaters by the sword and by wild beasts. So he gave some of the survivors for sport to be killed in their arenas. Now, the number of those that were carried captive during this whole war was collected to be 97,000, as was the number of those that perished during the whole siege, 1,100,000. The greater part of whom were indeed of the same nation with the citizens of Jerusalem, but not belonging to the city itself, for they were come up from all the country to the feast of unleavened bread, which means that the city was swelled with pilgrims from all over the world who had come to Jerusalem for the Passover, the Passover. And that meant that many more people were killed because there were that many more people from all over the world there. So when you read that horrific account, could you not say that Jesus' words, when he talks about great suffering, alluded to a time very shortly after he was raised? I mean, how much worse can this get? Streets running with blood. And the soldiers were so tired of killing people that they just took some captive. They were tired of it. So when Jesus says in 21, for at that time there will be great suffering, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no and never will be. Was Jesus referring to those times that we just read about in the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, or a future time near the end of the age when things will get worse? Or both? Was he referring to both?
Bob, this is Mark Schreiber. In reading these verses, one part of me wants to say that this has definitely not already happened, because in the context of all of the horrible things that would happen at the same time in the severe degree, we would have a historical account that aligns to that within a short period of time. So, that part of my interpretation would say, no, it's going to happen in the future. It hasn't happened in the past. But then a perspective is also to interpret this as this is a vision to Daniel. So Daniel might be seeing multiple events that happen over a long period of time, all kind of coming together. So to put a time context on that might also be, an error on our part. He might be seeing things that happened over many centuries or thousands of years coming together, right, and then culminating in, in the end of times at that point.
Yeah,
What are your
I
thoughts
agree.
on that?
I think a prophet gets not just information from God, but kind of sees the world as God sees it, and kind of grieves with God over the state of how humans can be so cruel to each other. And I think you're right. It could be a reference to more than one event before end times and to end times as well. I think it could be, I think you're right. I think it's really hard to pin down a prophecy like that, especially when history has spanned thousands of years since. And you could make a case for different eras. I agree with what you just said. Yeah.
Bob, this is Suzanne. Tying back into what was just offered, do we know of prophecies where they have come true, basically, in more than one time period?
Well, there's a prophecy, say, of the virgin birth.
Right.
And we know that happened one time. We
One
believe that was
time.
Mary. That was a specific prophecy for an event that happened once. So we believe that. But when we're talking about general things like great suffering or the desecration of the temple, those things have happened multiple times with the temple, and then great suffering happens all the time in the world and will happen maybe at the end as well. Then those prophecies are a little bit different than the specific ones, I think. So no, I don't think a prophecy, we're not saying that another Messiah will come, because we believe that Isaiah was speaking of Jesus, and you put a period after that. But when it comes to some of these other prophecies, they're just a little more general in the event that they're talking about, that it could be interpreted for different times. Because you don't know which one they're referring to, because it can be interpreted.
Well, I think even Jesus said, as far as in this life, we will have trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I tend not to agree with the interpretation of the Bible for a pre-tribulation rapture, because to me it doesn't seem to be in sync with what Jesus went through as a person going to the cross, and then what he has told his disciples they will face, and what he tells us about carrying our cross. And for those who remain faithful to the end, they will be saved in the midst of the suffering. So so I agree. I think that Jesus does, the whole gospel does talk about suffering.
Are all of the people that are dead totally left out of this?
That's another one of those, you could probably have a good class on that, because there's different things that Paul writes about the resurrection. And go back to what Peter said about Paul. He said, and Paul writes some things sometimes that are really hard to understand. I don't know. I don't have a clear theology in my own head of exactly how everyone will be raised who have died already, and those, you know, I think I've read different things in the Bible that speak of different teachings on that last resurrection, and I don't have an answer really. I don't. Maybe someone who's more enlightened than I am does. But when we say he's going to judge the living and the dead, I guess that what that means to me is, again, this is why the church, the traditional church, has kind of stayed out of this a lot over the years, is because it is so hard to interpret, or it can be interpreted in so many ways. They have left it at the creed. We know he will come at the end to judge the living and the dead. Exactly the order of how that will happen, and exactly how God will handle everyone that's ever been born, we'll kind of leave that one up to God, but we do know that everyone will come before the Lord and nothing will be hidden. So yeah, it's a good reason why a lot of churches don't delve into this, is because questions like that sometimes have a hard time being answered. Whereas other churches teach more emphatically that, well, I'm telling you, this is how it's going to be. And for some people, that's more appealing. You know, they like that clear-cut teaching that my church believes this is going to happen. And I guess that's why we have different churches.
Well, I guess I just believe that the Lord can take care of it.
Yeah, yeah. That's I think that's perfectly okay sometimes. That's out of my pay grade, and I know it's going to happen, but how, like I say, how it happens, that's really up to God. And I have enough trouble living the gospel and sharing it, and I'll let the Lord handle the judgment of everybody and the raising of the dead. So,
Hey, Bob.
Yeah, Ken.
I got an easier question for you, maybe.
Okay.
As far as the Jews are concerned, which is more devastating to their religion, 70 AD or 132 AD?
70 AD. The destruction of the temple is the most horrific thing that ever happened to the Jewish people in a biblical sense. I mean, because the temple there were no other places of worship but the temple at that time. The synagogues, you didn't worship in Nazareth, in Jesus' synagogue where he grew up. You just read the Bible, not just, you expounded on the Bible, you prayed, but you only worshiped at the temple, and God said, this is my dwelling place. And it was at the center of the life of them as a people. And the destruction of the temple was the worst of the worst. Second, like 1A and 1B, 1B would be the destruction of Jerusalem, and the Romans issued a law saying that it was illegal for Jewish people to live in Jerusalem. So not only did they destroy the temple and the city, they didn't want them coming back. They had got fed up with the uprisings and the rebellions, and their refusal to acknowledge the emperor as a lord, and their refusal to serve in the army, and just their refusal to be assimilated into the Greek Roman culture. And they were a thorn in the side of the Romans, and finally the Romans said, you cannot even live in Jerusalem anymore. And that was the great dispersion, where the Jews became a people of exile and living in the dispersion throughout the world. And why the creation of Israel in 1948 was a monumental thing, because they finally had a home again after 2,000 years of being evicted from Jerusalem. So it kind of goes hand in hand. I would say the temple is 1A and the city would be 1B, I guess.
All right, sounds very good.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Bob. Thank you.
Okay. Kind of getting down to the end of Matthew 24, so we'll finish that up next week, and we'll get into a small section on the modern Israel and how people are interpreting modern times in Israel, and then we'll pick up the book of Revelation if we finish that. So Anybody have anything they've been holding in for an hour? Waiting for the right time? Okay, well, it's great to see y'all again. Glad you came.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Bob.
My pleasure.
Thank you,
My
Bob.
pleasure. See you next week.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.